All right, let's dive into foster care systems in Europe, specifically Greece, Turkey, Croatia, and Spain. We're going to try to get a clearer picture of how things work over there, so buckle up. We've got a lot to cover.
Yeah, we do a lot of ground to cover. Each country is unique, of course, but we'll be highlighting some really fascinating similarities, A and E differences. We'll be looking at the successes, for sure, but also the areas that need improvement.
We'll be drawing from the European Reference Framework on Foster Family Document. It uses policy analysis, online questionnaires, and expert interviews.
Really combines a lot of perspectives into one comprehensive look, gives us valuable insight into all the complexities of these systems.
We've got some eye-opening stuff to share. We found some pretty surprising cultural differences at play, things like views on adoption of Roma children, or how migrant families are integrated as foster parents. And of course, we'll be talking about something that's not talked about enough, the emotional toll fostering takes, not just on families, but on the professionals too. But before we get into all of that, let's set the stage a bit. Can you give us a broad overview of the legal frameworks and how foster care is structured in each country?
You know, it's interesting. All four countries follow the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the UNCRC,
Oh,
which, that emphasizes putting a child's best interests first in any decision and prioritizing family-based care whenever possible.
that makes sense. Shared values. But what about when it comes to actually putting these systems into practice? How do they differ?
Oh, the differences are striking. So Greece has this very centralized system,
Okay.
while Turkey integrates foster care within like a broader child welfare system. Then you've got Croatia facing a lot of fragmentation and regional disparities.
Which I imagine creates its own set of problems.
Oh, absolutely. And then you have Spain with its decentralized system.
Yeah, Spain's system really caught my eye. It's almost like a choose your own adventure when it comes to fostering, right? I mean, even the option to adopt your foster child can differ from region to region.
It does. And that regional autonomy can be, well, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because it allows for some really innovative approaches in some areas, but then it also creates these inconsistencies across the country in terms of quality of care and support for foster families.
So even with the UNCRC as this like common foundation, the actual experience of fostering can vary drastically depending on where you are.
Exactly. And that's why we need to take a closer look at the specifics of each country and see how these variations play out in the lives of the children and families involved.
All right, that's a great foundation. Now I want to get into what it's actually like to be a foster parent in these countries. I mean, the report doesn't shy away from the realities these families face. What were some of the most common challenges that stood out to you?
There are some unfortunately recurring themes, regardless of location. Financial strain, big one.
Makes sense.
Many families feel like the support they get doesn't cover the real costs of caring for a child, especially if the child has, specific needs.
It does make you wonder how families are even managing, especially given, the emotional side of things.
Yeah, and that emotional burden, that's often coupled with, bureaucratic hurdles, a lack of access to specialized services. So many foster parents talk about feeling overwhelmed, isolated, trying to navigate this system and advocate for the specific needs of the kids they're caring for.
The report also mentions the really high levels of separation anxiety among foster families. It's heartbreaking,
Yeah.
to think about these families pouring their hearts into caring for a child only to potentially face separation due to factors outside their control.
Right, and the impact of those separations, huge. The report shares a pretty powerful story from Croatia about a foster parent who had to terminate care because they were completely burned out. Just no support, no resources. It really emphasizes the urgent need to make systemic changes to address these challenges and provide better support for these families.
Clearly, the system, even with the best of intentions, is falling short for the people who are giving the care.
Absolutely. We'll get into those systemic problems and look at some potential solutions a bit later. But first, I do want to mention that alongside all these challenges, there are success stories too. There are programs out there making a difference.
Yeah, the Samarijanka OB Foster Care Association in Croatia comes to mind. They offer counseling, training, even relaxation treatments for foster parents.
It's a great example of how targeted support can empower foster parents, give them the tools to better handle those challenges.
That holistic approach is really inspiring. Now, let's turn to a more complex side of fostering in Europe today, migrant children. With rising migration, how are these countries handling fostering for unaccompanied minors?
It's a crucial question.
Hmm.
And the answer's pretty varied. So Greece, they have a general system, but they really depend on NGOs like Metadrasi to support families who are taking in these unaccompanied minors.
So NGOs are filling a critical gap in Greece. What about the other countries?
Turkey and Croatia have stricter requirements. Foster care is limited to citizens only,
Okay.
which, that makes it really tough for unaccompanied migrant children. They often don't have these support networks, the legal protections that come with having citizen foster parents.
And Spain. They seem to be going in a completely different direction, encouraging migrant families to become foster parents.
Exactly. They recognize the importance of providing those culturally familiar environments for the kids, and they really see migrant families as a valuable resource within the foster care system.
Wow, so diverse approaches. Are there any practices in particular that stood out to you as, I don't know, impactful or innovative?
I found it really interesting that in Turkey, they facilitate video calls between deported family members and the children who are still in foster care.
Wow, that's really poignant. Even in a system that might seem restrictive at first glance, there's a clear understanding of the human need for connection, right? Especially for these children who are dealing with separation and displacement.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even small things can have a huge impact on a child's well-being.
Okay, so we've talked about the families, but we need to talk about the professionals working in these systems too. They're often overlooked, but so vital. What did the report say about the challenges and needs they face?
It paints kind of a concerning picture across all 4 countries. Professionals in foster care are facing a lot of challenges all at once.
What kind of challenges are we talking about?
Well, high caseloads are a major problem. People feel overwhelmed and stretched thin. Then there's the lack of training, especially training on understanding and addressing the needs of children who've experienced trauma. And on top of that, many feel undervalued and unsupported, which leads to high burnout rates.
So it's almost as if the system itself is setting up both families A&D professionals for failure. I was struck by how the report found that in some countries, professionals don't even have access to support for their own emotional well-being, and they're dealing with really tough, often traumatic cases every day.
Right. And it raises a big question about, the system's responsibility to care for the caregivers. I mean, how can we expect them to effectively support families and children if their own needs aren't being met?
Doesn't sound sustainable at all.
It's a big issue, really. If we want to create a truly supportive and effective system, we have to prioritize the well-being of everyone involved, the children, the families, and the professionals behind the scenes.
Okay, so a lot of concerning stuff about the state of foster care in these countries. But before we get too lost in the problems, I'm curious about solutions. What are the experts recommending?
There's a lot of focus on better support and training for both families and professionals.
Okay, better support and training. That's a good starting point. What specifically are they suggesting?
Well, one recommendation is to really revamp those training programs, not just more training, but better, more relevant training. In Croatia, for example, they're suggesting we move away from those traditional questionnaires and use focus groups instead to get feedback from foster parents.
That's a good idea. I mean, a multiple choice survey can't really capture the nuances and complexities of, the day-to-day of foster care.
Exactly. We need to create those spaces where people can really talk openly and learn from each other's experiences. Another big area for improvement, financial support for foster families.
I was just thinking about that. It's hard to imagine, having to manage those added costs of caring for a child, especially if you're already struggling financially.
Right, and that's a major obstacle to making fostering work. A lot of parents end up stretched thin, trying to, provide emotional support. A&D deal with the financial stress of providing basic needs for the child.
And if you're constantly worried about money, how can you create that stability and support a foster child needs?
It's just not possible.
Yeah.
So addressing that financial burden is crucial. The experts are calling for more financial assistance, better access to things like, affordable childcare, transportation, healthcare.
It all adds up. It sounds like the goal is to create a support system that's, I don't know, more holistic, one that tackles the practical challenges head on.
Yeah, that's it. And part of that means making the bureaucratic stuff less of a hassle. Streamlining processes, clarifying the legal frameworks, making it easier for families to navigate the system and advocate for the kids they're caring for.
Oh, on the topic of streamlining, there was a recommendation from Turkey about improving the integration of older children into foster families.
That's a really important point, and something a lot of foster care systems struggle with. Teens, especially, often get overlooked, and their needs, which are very specific, aren't always met.
It's sad to think about, you know? These teenagers, they're at such a critical stage in their lives. They need stability and guidance more than ever, but they often fall through the cracks.
And the longer they stay in the system without a permanent, loving home, the harder it becomes to meet their needs and help them transition successfully into adulthood.
So, creating a more supportive environment for those older youth is really crucial.
Absolutely. Every child, no matter their age, deserves the chance to thrive, and that means having a loving and supportive home.
So, we've got better training, more financial support, smoother processes. It's a lot to ask, but it's clear that changes need to happen. Were there any other recommendations that really resonated with you?
There was a strong emphasis on making mental health services more accessible, and not just for the children, but for the foster families and professionals too.
Makes sense. Trauma-informed care it's so important, but we can't just focus on the kids. Everyone involved in the system in some way is impacted by trauma.
Exactly. Providing counseling, therapy, support groups, all of those things are key.
Mm.
We need to think about the whole person, not just treat the symptoms.
Right, because caring for children who have gone through trauma, that takes a lot of resilience, a lot of emotional strength that can be incredibly draining for families and D professionals.
And that's where having those support networks, that sense of community becomes so important. Reducing isolation, creating connections that can really help people cope.
The experts also highlighted the need for more public awareness and understanding of foster care. It's like it's this hidden world that most people don't think about unless they're directly affected by it.
Right. And that lack of awareness, it feeds into the stigma around foster care, which then makes it even harder to recruit families and get the resources they need. It's this cycle we need to break.
So it's about changing how we talk about foster care, making it more visible, more valued in society.
You know, after all this research, one of the things that really stuck with me is that foster care, it's not just a system, it's about people. Real people with real emotions and needs. Children who need a safe and loving place, families opening their hearts and homes, and the professionals working tirelessly to make it all come together.
That really resonated with me too. It reminds us that we're all connected, and the way we approach foster care really reflects our values as a society.
It does. And it brings us to a final question for our listeners. What role can we play in making sure every child has a chance to thrive? It's not just about fixing a system, it's about building a better future for all children.
That's something worth fighting for. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's inspired you to learn more, get involved, and maybe even make a difference in the lives of the children and families touched by foster care.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, right? We've uncovered some tough stuff about foster care in Europe, but there's also so much good work being done. So where do we go from here? What can our listeners do to actually make a difference?
You know, it all starts with awareness. You got to educate yourself about the system in your own community first. What are the challenges there? What kind of support is missing?
Yeah.
Once you get a grasp on that landscape, you can start figuring out where you fit in.
Knowledge is power, but then what? What do we do with that knowledge?
Oh, there's so many ways to get involved. You could donate to organizations that help foster families financially, or you could volunteer your time at a local agency.
We talked about respite care earlier, right? Just giving those parents a break, even if it's just for a few hours, can be huge. Absolutely. It's a small thing, but it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And don't underestimate the power of using your voice. Contact your elected officials, let them know that foster care matters to you. Talk about it on social media. Talk to your friends and family about why it's important. Every voice matters. It all adds up.
It's about changing the story, right? Making foster care something people see, something they value.
Yeah, and going through all this research, it really hit me. Foster care, it's not just a system, it's about people. It's about children needing love and stability. It's about families opening their homes and their hearts. And it's about the professionals who dedicate their lives to making it all work.
It's about the human element. And that really stuck with me too. It's like it's a mirror, you know? How we treat foster care shows what we value as a society.
And that brings us to one final thought, something to really think about. What can WE do to create a world where every child has the chance to thrive? This isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about creating something better for all children.
And that's worth fighting for. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Hopefully it's inspired you to learn more, get involved, and maybe even make a difference in the lives of these children and families.